In this episode, I want to talk to you about one of the most influential frameworks that I've come across over the past few years. That's been so helpful for me in my own life in dealing with my own mental health. And it's come to influence how I view almost everything. I'm talking about the dynamic, reciprocal, intricately connected relationship between chaos and order. Everything I've come to see is a mixture between chaos and order. And I think that the degree to which we can balance these two primordial qualities of the universe in our own psyche, in our own body, in our own external life, and also in society determines the degree to which we experience well being and thriving and can continue to adapt and to grow individually and collectively. So that's what I want to focus on in this episode. So here I'm going to describe the relationship between chaos and order and define what these are to explain how we can observe this in so many different aspects of our life, everything from the way in which we experience our daily lives and the suffering we experience in our daily life to externally in our work, in our relationships, even in things like in watching our favorite sports teams. And I'll give an example of basketball, which I'm a huge fan of. And I also hope to offer some concrete suggestions for how to balance chaos and order in our own lives and therefore help us to resolve some of our own challenges and to find greater balance and well being. You're probably familiar with the Yin Yang symbol. This is a symbol that comes from Taoism, but we see it pretty much everywhere in our current society, everywhere from little keychains and knickknacks to wall posters to maybe the bag that you keep your weed in to that guy Steve in our yoga class who has the yin yang symbol tattooed on the back of his shoulder. We see it everywhere. This symbol is fundamentally a representation between chaos and order, which is perhaps why we're so drawn to it, even unconsciously. So, just to give a little bit of definition to what each of these sides of the symbol means. The white swirl with the little black dot represents order, and the black swirl with the little white dot represents chaos. So, what do we mean by order and chaos? Maybe you're familiar with these terms, but maybe this is the first time you're hearing about order and chaos as far as a psychological take on them. So, order is the area of the known. It's associated with effort, with doing, with being orderly and organized, with having a plan. Order is tradition and rules. It's a framework of knowing that can help to set our life straight, but it can also be too rigid, as we'll discuss a little bit later on. So that's order, and order is typically associated with the masculine, whereas chaos is associated with the feminine. And I know that can sound like it has a certain connotation, but chaos is actually order's equal and equally beautiful opposite. And I would argue, in fact, that we need more chaos. We need more of the feminine qualities in our life, internally and externally in the world. So both are necessary, and we need a healthy balance between both. So I've defined order. What's chaos? Chaos is the opposite. It's the twin opposite of order. It's not knowing. It's leaving space for the unknown. It's non-doing. It's intuition. Order is the source of creativity. It's the source of something new in our life coming in. Or I'm sorry, chaos breaks down and decomposes order. It bends order, it breaks it. And every time that we experience chaos in our life, as it breaks down order, it also creates the space for something new and potentially more beautiful. And I would argue better to come into our life. So, chaos is the precipitant to developing new order. Chaos and order are the basic building blocks of complex systems, of which everything in the world, including ourselves and our psyche, is a complex system. And complex systems have to balance order and chaos in order to survive, in order to thrive. And order must be broken down and the system must change so that it can re-evolve, so that it can evolve and adapt into new order until it gets broken down again, and so on and so on. So this is a constant kind of iterative process and relationship between the two. This is how evolution happens, and this is also how we grow in our psyche. So I mentioned that order and chaos are associated with masculine and feminine. And again, just to reiterate here that we need a balance of both of those things. When we don't have a balance between masculine and feminine, we might develop symptoms either in ourselves or in society. And we can certainly see how there's an imbalance between masculine and feminine in our current society. And by masculine and feminine, I don't mean imbalance between male and female or male and female power. What we have to recognize is that our system is very masculine dominated. And again, I don't mean male dominated, although it is, and you can make that argument clearly. But I think it's much more helpful to focus on these energies of masculine and feminine versus the gender of male or female and placing the blame there. What we need is more feminine energies in the world, not necessarily more females in power. It doesn't mean the same thing. More females in power, whether there's an equal amount or more females in power, it doesn't make a difference if the qualities, if the energies that we're favoring are continuing to be masculine. So to slide more female gender human beings into power, into a system that is in favor of more masculine energy, is just going to continue to perpetuate the same problems and the same symptoms that we're seeing today. So instead of focusing on male versus female, I think we need to focus more on introducing and placing more value on these feminine, wonderful, beautiful qualities of intuition and not knowing and creativity and compassion and rest and recovery. Okay. We'll save that argument and conversation for another episode because I think there's so much to uncover there, and hopefully we can have some people on that can have a much more intelligent take on it than I do. So balancing these primordial forces is key. When we have too much of one of them, we see pathology. Let me just give some examples and maybe you can relate to some of these. When we have too much order in our life, we're rigid and we're unable to adapt our routines or our behaviors, even though they're not working. Our behaviors in our work, in our relationships, in the way that we take care of ourselves, maybe in our diet or our exercise routines. We need order. We need definition to our day and to our life. But when things are no longer working and we continue to stick to the same things, that's too much order. That's pathological or unhelpful order. And basically, when we experience symptoms, This is the world giving us feedback. This is a feedback mechanism that we need to be more flexible. We need to allow more chaos in. We need to let go of what we know and allow some of the unknown to come into our life to better shape it in a way that is more functional and helpful for us. So, this is too much order here. And in societies, we can see too much order when they're relying too heavily on control or suppression. Now, there's a lot to be said about what's happening now in our current society, arguably on both sides. There's a thirst or a need or an attachment to wanting to control other people on both sides. And of course, what we're going to see is some sort of pushback, some sort of backlash to that. This is chaos. Chaos doesn't like actually as beings individually and collectively, we don't like too much order. The world, the universe knows that this is not healthy. So when there's too much control, too much suppression, it pretty much guarantees that there will be chaos in society and in the world. This is represented archetypally by the old king. This is the masculine, the all-knowing, the all-powerful system that cannot adapt. This type of system, this type of tyrannical system that we're not in now, but maybe we're trending towards, is bound to be overthrown and replaced with something new. And we see this in other societies that have these types of oppressive governments. Eventually, like a pressure cooker, its citizens are going to rise up and overthrow it, and it has to be replaced with something new. Now, just a quick side note on this. I think we're in a position right now where we can choose in our society whether we're going to get to the point of becoming so pathological that we have to introduce basically complete chaos into our system and completely overthrow and overhaul the system and build something new from scratch. That's certainly a possibility. And I think that we can feel it in our bones today. We feel that we're heading in that direction. So that's one possibility. And it might be an inevitability. I mean, inevitably, we have to create something new in our society. We know that. This is what we're pining for and acting so fervently for, is something new to come in. But I don't think that we have to completely overthrow a system and completely have it crumble in order to build something new. If we can very skillfully and mindfully and intentionally balance this middle way, this line between order and chaos, we can break down piece by piece, not completely, but a little, just little pieces, and flex and bend and introduce chaos and feminine into our society in ways that will allow it to, over time, be able to adapt and reorganize and reorganize and reorganize over and over again. This is how individuals and species and societies over time have survived without being completely wiped out. They continue to adapt. There's this dynamic back and forth between having order, chaos, order, chaos. This is the middle way. This is the walking of the middle line. And I think it's possible to do that, but it's really hard. We want to fall completely on the side of either too much completely order or completely chaos. But if we can take a step back and recognize the utility of both in helping a system to be healthy and to thrive, we can find that middle way and in a healthy way, be able to evolve into something better, something more beautiful. So, okay, coming back now. So, I mentioned how order can be pathological in our own life. What about too much chaos? What does that look like? Too much chaos in our life, we've all experienced this, is when we feel maybe really disorganized. We can't even clean our room or get the dishes done. We have so many tasks to do, and we haven't prioritized them. We haven't put them into a hierarchy based on our value system or what's most important right now. Um, Chaos can manifest as addiction. It can manifest when we don't when we're not living in a way that's intentional, both from kind of a micro and more macro position. If we don't wake up in the morning and set an intention for how we want to be in that day, it's basically like a free for all. There might be too much chaos. If we don't have intention, if we don't have values, a compass to live by in our life, some direction of where we're going, where we want to get to, that's also chaos. We're just kind of floating around. So again, here, I mean, as far as having a value system and an aim and a purpose in our life, again, here we see this beautiful relationship between order and chaos. This is where the sweet spot is. We want to have a compass. We want to know where we're going, but we don't want to be too attached to our ideas about where we need to be. If we're too attached to a certain outcome or what things should look like, that's too much order. And we're not allowing those things to come into our life that, as we look back, have been gifts, those things that we never expected, those paths that we never expected to take. Um, that's chaos, those unexpected things, when things don't go as planned. But at the same time, we need some definition. So we need a guide, we need an intention, we need to have this compass, but we also need to be flexible enough and to pay attention enough to really listen to what life is giving us in order to adapt our path. So this is like an ongoing conversation between what we're showing up with and setting with as an intention in our life, and then what the universe is giving back to us and where it wants us to go. This is this is order and chaos in our life. So I'm just going to pose the question here. Where do you think you fall on this continuum of order and chaos? I think that, and I will go into a little bit about where I fall on this continuum, but I think that we all tend to lean towards one side or the other. And perhaps our task, and maybe this is what why we're here in these bodies in some sense, is maybe to try to find more balance between these two things. So I don't have any, you know, hardcore research to go off of, but this is just my observation here. I think that those of us who tend to be more anxious, and raising my hand here, tend to fall on the side of too much order. And this is generally called in psychology, um, or if we're thinking about this from a kind of psychopathological perspective, the in quote internalizing disorders or internalizing behaviors. So these are things like anxiety, whether it's OCD or social anxiety or panic disorder, as well as things like depression or eating disorders. And I think in this group here, these individuals fall on the side of too much order, of too much control. We want to control everything too much, which is why we're in our body, our mind is reflecting back to us um, what that means with symptoms, with anxiety, with depression. So, I mean, the body and our mind are speaking to us in symptoms, saying, "Hey, um, you're y- you're kind of a control freak here. you're kind of a control freak, and maybe you need to allow in a little bit more chaos, a little more of the feminine qualities, feminine energies into your life. So that's pathological order, in my opinion. Okay. And then the opposite of that, again, this is, from a clinical perspective, is what we would call kind of the externalizing disorders or externalizing behaviors. And these are people who might struggle with anger problems or impulsivity or rage, maybe even addiction. They have a hard time, for lack of a better term, like shutting up. So they're kind of more disinhibited. Whereas on the internalizing disorders, people's problems are come from kind of being too much inside of themselves and suffering from basically being too much in their own world. The externalizing disorders, the problems and suffering are coming from like disinhibition, from being too external, and there's not enough of this reining in and kind of relationship and reflection on self. Um, so I think we all kind of fall to one side or the other, whether it rises to the criteria of being a clinical disorder or not. These things exist on a spectrum, so we all have these traits in some sense. And I think these internalizing and externalizing generally shake down, again, generally broad brushstrokes here, to whether we're an introvert or an extrovert. And so, again, introverts may be suffering from too much order, extroverts suffering from too much chaos. And our task here is to be able to try to balance these things. So I mentioned that I would try to um, go into a little bit of where I think I fall on the spectrum. So I have struggled with OCD for much of my life, and not just OCD, but having panic attacks. And thank goodness those have subsided for the most part. But I did go through a stretch of time in my life, a pretty significant stretch of time where I had panic attacks every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. So, needless to say, here, um, we can think about this as falling on the side of too much order. I need to know not just things, but everything. I need to know, and I need to be in control. And I have a hard time letting those wonderful, mysterious, unknown, beautiful qualities, really, really beautiful qualities and creative qualities of chaos coming into my psyche and into my existence. And something I continue to work on every day. Now, just because we might favor the energies of either chaos or order doesn't mean that our life, just because we might favor those things on the inside, doesn't mean our life on the outside will necessarily reflect that. In fact, it can sometimes be the opposite. And this is again where life is trying to balance itself out. So, someone who is very rigid, who wants to control, so someone who's too orderly, um, and rigid in their life is going to be presented with chaos in their life in order to help to break down the order. It's basically the universe begging us to let go of some of that rigidity. If we're not going to do it ourselves inside of us internally in our psyche, the world will give it to the world will hand us chaos. It's going to do it for us externally. Things that we things that we cannot symptoms that we cannot um, integrate and be aware of on the inside will be presented to us externally. The more we don't pay attention to something in our own psyche, the more it has to show up in order to get our attention. So those of us who are rigid are being presented maybe with a lot of chaos in our life. So the chaos is an invitation from whatever you might think, whether it's just you know the universe or the world or your higher self or God, basically to stop being so orderly. And I think the same can be true in some sense in the reverse situation. Okay, so I believe that the person that can walk this thin line between order and chaos, who can dance and play on the edge of these two energies, is, as the kids say, living their best life. I think that the individuals and the species that have best balanced order and chaos historically are the ones that went on to survive. And I think that the individuals and groups and systems that best balance order and chaos are not only the ones that are surviving and thriving in today's world, but they're the things that draw. We're so attracted to those things. We're in awe when we see it. And that's why they are what they are. That's why they're in the public spotlight. So these are our favorite performers and our favorite athletes and our favorite, I don't know, I was going to say favorite politicians, but I don't know about that. These are the companies that maybe are either doing well or the companies that we love to see. These are um, our favorite authors in their work, in their writing, are somehow balancing chaos and order. They are writing a story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, having some idea of what they want to write about. But then there's this process of discovery and newness and um, unexpected turns that happens throughout the work. Something beautiful that people can't even describe. This muse of some creative force coming in and shaping the direction of what they thought was going to be a particular argument or story. Um, and this is chaos and order again. So I think we're in awe every time we see it. And that's why we value so highly the people and the things that are able to balance chaos and order the best. Let me give a more concrete example of um, of an example of when we're drawn to awe. So, as I mentioned, I'm uh, a big basketball fan. So let's just take this for example. Maybe you're not a basketball fan, but you're probably familiar enough with the game to understand the analogies here. Not just the analogies, but the realities here. I've begun to see, as I've begun to notice chaos and order in everyday life, how this plays out in basketball. And again, in any type of performance that we're watching, whether it's soccer or football or um, Olympic figure skating or whatever it is. In basketball in the NBA, for example, um, we're watching a game or we're following a team, and order and chaos, I think, are present in every play on the court, in every micro decision, but also in the game as a whole, and also in the competitive atmosphere and the system that is the NBA as a whole. And the individuals and the teams that are best able to balance order and chaos are the ones that survive. The team that wins the championship every year, just to put it very straightforwardly, is the team that's best able to balance order and chaos. So here's an example here. Um, let's just look at this from the um, kind of from the lens or the zooming out to just watching a basketball game. The team, each team comes in with a game plan. Okay, so this is order. You do your homework. You're studying the other team. You know what you want to do. You know generally that you're gonna, focus more on, you know, trying to score points down low or trying to, you know, out rebound, or maybe you're going to play more around the perimeter and take advantage of their poor perimeter defense and 3-point shooting, whatever. So you're coming into each game with a plan about what you want to do. This is order. You need this. Teams that don't come in with any sort of plan, that don't do their homework, they don't know. Um, there's too much chaos there. So and they're likely not to win the game. But I've observed, and I could just be projecting here, but The teams that come in with too much order and can't adapt to the game, and I think any coach would tell you this, also fail in the game. You can't come in too rigid. So my college basketball team is Michigan State because that's where I went to school. Um, this is but not by any means a knock on Coach Izzo, who's one of the best college coaches ever. But sometimes I think we come in and with and we are not adapting to what the team is giving us. And we see this all the time with teams in any sport. You're coming in and you know that the first play, you're going to dump it down to the big man in the post. That's, that's your game plan. And maybe you decide that, okay, we're really going to just dump it down to the guy in the post. And that's how we're going to win this game. But I've seen teams who are doing that and it's not working, and they continue to go to rely on that plan for the entire game, even though it doesn't work, and those teams fail. So you need to be able to be flexible and adapt to what's happening in the very moment, um, in order to be able to win the game. So that's that's on like a game level. So just to sum up, teams need to have some order. They need to have plans, but they also need to be flexible enough to respond to what the other team is doing, to what's happening in each and every single moment of the game, and as the game goes on. If you can balance those two things, if you can balance um, having a plan with also not knowing and taking it and being open enough to the unknown of what's unfolding in each moment, you're going to win. The team who can best do that is going to win. This is also happening in each micro moment of the game. And I think that players who can best balance chaos and order are the ones that we look up to the most. So let's just say LeBron James, for example, or you know, whatever, Kevin Durant or whoever your whoever your favorite player is. But the players that we're in awe of are the ones who have put in incredible work beforehand. This is order. They've refined in- incredibly the skill that they've cultivated for themselves. It's just the order that they have and the discipline that they have is just unbelievable. But that in itself is not enough. You can't show up to the game and you can't show up to each play knowing what's going to happen. You've practiced you've practiced your jump shot from the elbow 1,000 times in practice the day before. But if you show up knowing that you're going to try to take that shot every time down the floor, it's just not going to work because you don't know what is going to happen. You don't know what the defense is going to give you. So we're in awe when the players that we see can balance their mix of skill and being able to respond in each second to what the defender in front of them and the team in front of them is giving them. It's just this beautiful poetry of chaos and order, of players being able to adapt in each moment to what's happening. And this is the again, this is the beauty of what we're watching in front of us. We're in awe because you don't know what's going to happen each time down the floor, but you can score a basket if you've put in the work to be able to be skilled enough and to have enough cohesion as a team and to be able to respond appropriately and to flex and adapt to what you're seeing in front of you. And it's just such a beautiful process when we see that unfold. And then, boom, success, you get a bucket. So that happens in each micro movement. Um, so it happens on the micro, it happens on the level of the game, but it also happens on the level of the season too. As the season goes along, you might have a plan, an idea of how this is going to go. But then over the course of the season, oh, maybe you need to substitute, this person for this person in the starting lineup, or we're gonna play more inside out versus outside in, or whatever. You have to be able to adapt, and especially when you get to the playoffs, you could be a really great team throughout the season, but if you can't adapt to what's in front of you, then you're just not going to make it through the gauntlet. So the champion each year is the team that's best able to balance order and chaos. And that is why we're so obsessed with them, because we see that and perhaps we know that is what we look up to. That's what we strive for. We want to be able to cultivate that within ourselves, within and also within the systems that we live within. And these teams and these individuals are examples of how to do that. We don't consciously see that this is what's we don't consciously think about, oh, how beautiful they're balancing chaos and order, but we're drawn to it and we can't take our eyes off of it and we look up to it because somewhere in our psyches we know that this is also our task and our destiny. Let me give one more example here of balancing, um, of how this works in performance. I'm also a huge fan of improv comedy, both of watching it, and it's something that I've practiced, meaning that I've taken classes and I performed as an improviser in the past. It's an art that I think is so beautiful and such a metaphor for the way that we can live our life. So think about, maybe you've been to an improv show and undoubtedly you've either been to a stand-up comedy show or you've watched some stand-up on TV. And again, here, the performers, whether they're improvisers or the comedian on stage, has to balance order and chaos in order for you to, to really have a good time, for the magic to happen. In the case of the comic, they have refined their routine. They've figured out what's worked. They've done it over and over. This is order. They can't come in completely empty with no material. I mean, some comics, really are talented at being able to riff on the spot, but generally they have something in mind or something they've practiced before. So you have to come in with material, but also you don't want a comic coming in there and just like reciting the same words and the same jokes word for word with the same intonation and the same style as they've done in previous performances. The comic has to respond to the crowd. They have to respond to the chaos of the moment and be able to adapt and be able to tie things in that happened earlier in the performance, for example. So there has to be this mixture there. The same thing in improv comedy. I mean, really, you're forced into chaos, into the unknown in improv because you don't know what's going to happen. But you also have to have a little bit of order in there. For example, you don't just go into you don't just start a scene with nothing out of the complete unknown. The audience gives you a suggestion, right? They give you a relationship, or they give you um, a setting, or they give you a behavior to be doing something that adds some definition to the scene. So there's some order right there. It adds definition to what you're doing. And then when you have some order, that invites in chaos. You get to play within that. And the good improvisers and the good improvisational teams, they really set the stage for you at the beginning of the scene, so you know what you're looking at. They tell you through their behaviors, what the relationship is, what the setting is, what they're doing, and you learn all of this about the scene. They set the order, they set the walls, the parameters of the scene, and then when you set that, you just get to play. It's chaos. You don't know what's going to happen, all the unknown, all these unexpected things happens, and that's what's so funny about this, and that's when we laugh the most. Um, we've all been, at least I've been in performances where you notice, and I'm obviously guilty of this as well. You notice that the performer has something, the improviser has something that they want to say. They have some joke they want to crack. But if it's not fresh in the moment, if they're holding on for it for too long and then they try to get it in there, it's just not very funny. It doesn't land, it doesn't work because there's too much order. They're not responding to the moment. So again, it's this beautiful mix between having some boundaries to the scene, being able to make you have to make decisions in improv. You have to make decisive things that cut the scene in this direction or that direction. That's order. But then again, you're always listening, always responding, always being mindful in the moment of what is going on right now so that I can respond and to adapt. So you have also this relationship to chaos. And this sort of reminds me of this wonderful um, metaphor that I really love, which is that paradise. And it's saying that paradise is a walled garden. So maybe just meditate on that for a second. Paradise is a walled garden, meaning that in order to have paradise, in order to live paradise in your mind, to have paradise on earth, we have parameters, we have boundaries, we have order. Within the order is chaos. And a garden is typically has historically and psychically uh, been able to represent chaos. It's the emergence of um, newness, of new life. So paradise is a walled garden. Paradise is a mixture between order and chaos. Okay. So I thought maybe at this point I would go into a little bit more detail about how I've used this framework in my own life to manage mental health, but I think I've given a good amount of context here for that. I'm always happy to have conversations outside of this podcast. But again, just to say that I really have come to see over now many, many years. I know I'm sounding like an old man here. Many, many years of being a therapist. Not that many years, but maybe like 8 or more years of seeing therapy patients and being in the world of clinical psychology. I do think that we can understand mental health disorders. I think all mental health disorders as fundamentally an imbalance between order and chaos in one way or the other. That's what I'm coming to see in my observation, both conceptually and in observing and working with people in the room. We struggle to do that. And it's not just those of us with mental health disorders, because all of us struggle to do that. If we could perfectly balance order and chaos in our life, we'd probably be enlightened. And then we'd be done and we wouldn't have to come back into uh, into another body. So that's it. So if we're here, I think we're struggling to balance these two things. And the pointers to doing that are all around us in the things that we observe in the world, the things that we're obsessed with or drawn to, and the people and the processes that we can't take our eyes off of. Our favorite things are showing us this in some sense. And it's present in our own internal experience. The symptoms that we're having in our life are basically um, pointers. They're asking us to either create more space for chaos to come in, for the unknown, or to be more maybe disciplined or more intentional and to create more order. And it's it's a constant back and forth between those two. And as we go back and forth between order and chaos and back and forth and back and forth and balance and balance and balance, the system of our psyche and our life and the world around us begins to evolve and to grow into something, into its higher version of itself. This is the process of order and breaking down and new order. So, this is the relationship between chaos and order. And thank you so much for listening here. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to being with you on future episodes.